adjust that and see if well, it's a little off. Okay, good morning. So it is Saturday, January 13th, and we're going to be talking about whatever it is that you all want to talk about. Let's see if I can adjust that a little bit. We'll talk about whatever it is that you want to discuss. Um, I will say that there are only two or three things that I want to talk about immediately. And those things are, let's put that over there. Those things are few and far between. When I was thinking about what we could talk about today, I was thinking, well, American politics are very easy for me. And I know that that's generally a minefield for people because ironically, half my, or the majority of my audience are on the left side of the spectrum. But I'm not trying to make political points. We're all here just to support Ukraine. And people, I know that step on a beehive sometimes with that, but my perspective is my perspective, and maybe it'll help you. I have to factor in the other side of that as well. We're going to talk about a little about that with the American politics, the candidates, and Congress. We're going to talk about Taiwan, and that's going to factor in here. Um, yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that, I think. Um, and I think we're going to also get into like some minor things that are major news blips. Let's start with the major news blip. No, I was going to talk about Gonzalo Lira as a first thing, but I don't want to. So I saw a comment yesterday where like somebody was talking about Gonzalo Lira, and then said Gerdes is going to have to do a video about that. Oh, crap! I don't want to do a whole video about him. Better to just talk about it here. Um, but I will answer your questions like I did in the past because it seems to work best when I have like I just answer the most recent question. It seems like it's a pain in the neck for you to post your question and then um, uh, have to repeat it perhaps. But if you do that, that's actually more efficient for me to be able to try to answer them. I know that makes a problem for you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm not trying to make it difficult for you, but the first few live streams I was doing, I was trying to answer every question, like just systematically go down the list because I feel like students in class, I wouldn't want to just like not answer your questions, and that was very difficult. Okay, so with all that set up, what do you want to talk about first? So glad you're feeling well enough this morning's briefing. Thank you. That's for Dennis. Oh, that's Dennis Tate saying that. Yeah, I get migraines every once in a while, and it just hit me the last time I was about to do this. Somebody asked me if my migraine or your home remedies work. I somehow I miss some of them. Like I know magnesium, is it magnesium, yeah, magnesium deficiency can aggravate that, and I don't know why I'm susceptible to migraines, but I somehow am. So I have like prescribed stuff to take when I feel it, and I can kind of feel like, oh, it's coming on. It's not right now, but at any rate, so if you have other home remedy suggestions of it, I'm all ears. Anyway, let's see. How does the Houthis' response affect Ukraine? Okay, so this channel is completely geared to Ukraine. Like I was doing videos that nobody was really watching that I found interesting about leadership stuff because that's what I teach. And I was doing that and happily ensconced in doing that. And then the war hit, and I was like, started talking about Ukraine and particularly looking at Zelensky, and like they weren't really that interested in it over there. I created this own channel just to be talking about this. So in support of Ukraine, I don't feel like I need to cover the war in Israel and Palestine, except how Russia is trying to amplify that to divert from Ukraine. And I think it's the same kind of thing with the Houthis. What's going on there is diverting from Ukraine. And I think if China and Taiwan break out, I have to almost fully cover that because now it's taken the West's attention so much away from that. Like, I don't know how I'll have the bandwidth to be able to do that. But and by the way, the vice president in Taiwan won, making it much more likely that China and Taiwan are going to go to it. I hope not. I hope that cooler heads prevail. I hope the rhetoric calms down. But if the opposition candidate, the pro, and this wouldn't have been a great scenario either, there was a pro-Chinese, more unifying candidate. Had he won, I think it would have tamped that down, but then China would have been trying to politically make pull Taiwan back in. So either way, it was going to be tricky. And I know that the U.S. government is looking like their posture is okay. Ukraine, you're kind of we want to make sure everything's going on okay with you, but we got to keep our eye on the ball over here with China because we believe that this is the next big threat. That's the posture of the US government, and that's part of why you're seeing not as much of a not from Congress, I mean, from the administration, not as much of a full-throated defense as you were seeing before. Um, yeah, I believe that that's the case. Okay, let me go back to it. Mr. Squiggle, migraine, try and ice on appropriate place where it helps and don't remove it, tie it down, also temper. Yeah, I mean, I have used that to two things put mouth pressure point. Is there okay? Is thank you, Mr. Squiggle. Hit the like button. I appreciate that. When you all hit the like button, this goes further and faster. Dana Pearson says, "Is there any way to get a handle on the amount of U.S. Russian oligarch money being funneled into the Republican Party? For example, I heard a speaker gets a bunch of money from the oligarchs. Yeah, I don't know that there is. Um, I think the greater threat there is ideological rather than money because they bought certain concepts. Maybe there is money flowing through. I do not know this, right? I'm just speculating. Maybe there is. I think it's less insidious than the ideological um, tampering with their thinking that is causing them to lean away from Ukraine and for pro Russia. I'm really working on like the survey stuff that I put out there. I, I saw a big trend and I'm excited about the survey that I put out there. A lot of you were like, "Rah, I can't answer this anyway, or whatever, or wanted to argue or fight with it." But you'll see statistical trends if you go back to the surveys that I put on the community tab, where the way that conservatives like me think, as opposed to now here's Republican and here's MAGA Republican, the way they think, there's a big difference. And the way that moderates think, there's more of a difference. In the way that liberal left side of the spectrum think, there's even more of a difference in the questions that I asked about are ideologically are Russians and and Republicans on the same page or not. There's a really telling difference. It's like 10 points with each 10-point step down with each. I'm going to probably do a video about that later on. But I think I've figured out a way to speak to evangelicals who support MAGA to help loosen their grip on being supportive of Russia. And then the next step will be how to communicate it. But I think I understand something. It's a little bit. It's not fully baked, so it shouldn't come out of the oven yet. Okay. At any rate, what do I expect for the second anniversary on February 24th? Don't know. I mean, there's no way I can predict. We'll see. Hi, Professor. Is there any chance of a birth of a center party? Is the bipartisan structure eternal? Thank you for everything. Yeah. So everyone in Europe says, why do you only have two parties? This is crazy. Well, if it's winner take all, which it is, 50% plus one wins. And so you have every incentive to create your coalition on the front end before you run and stay within major parties because another party takes so much. It, it's the same reason that like, okay, so Taiwan is the center of, chip manufacturing, right? Why don't people just start their own chip manufacturing somewhere else? Because it's too cost prohibitive to just start that, and nobody will buy it for the higher price, and it's kinda like that within our parties, right? If it's winner take all, then you just can't match the resources and the name recognition and well name recognition's hurting in the Republican Party right now, but you can't match this, and so every incentive is there. And so in the American system, all the actions in the primaries are about to begin in about a week, 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, and so that is where you make your choice. So within the Republican Party, you have essentially Trump, you have Vivek, you have DeSantis, and you have Haley. Now, what I find really interesting about this is that we know where Trump's position is, and he has this outrageous support for the small block of supporters, and then he has outrageous negatives for a large block of the country. And so I think he can win the primary. I don't know that he will. He can win the primary, but winning the general is going to be a different thing because of his high negatives. Okay. And we know where he is on Ukraine. Let's just talk about Ukraine. So there's Trump. Then there's Vivek, who's like little Trump, who wants to be Trump. And then there's DeSantis, who disappointingly has said that he wouldn't be supporting Ukraine. So they not no Ukraine, no Ukraine, no Ukraine. And then there's Haley. Now, the good news about that is that with just this one, if you're like me, you have Haley as an alternative to these three. Now, I otherwise could have been if DeSantis had been pro-Ukraine, I could have been like, okay, DeSantis, maybe let's look at him. But all three of these are over here, and Haley's the only other choice. And I think this is going to help Haley. Haley's my great hope for my party at this point. She was the governor of South Carolina, pretty well liked governor of South Carolina, and then she burnished her credentials as the ambassador to the UN. So she has the foreign policy kind of stuff. It usually you only have one or the other, right? You only had as governor, you had the executive experience, but you don't have the foreign policy experience that you might have if you were, say, in the Senate or something along those lines. Okay. And she's got both. So I think that it's yet to be seen what's going to happen. I think that all the assaults on Trump from like legal kind of things have only made him bigger within that rabid block. It's like when you take something away from someone, they want it more. It's counterintuitive, but all these things that have been done trying to knock him out of the race have only made people go, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to make sure I get him in. Like it's not the most rational process, but that's how people operate. Okay, let's see. Lynn Cheney should be the GOP nominee. Lynn Cheney will go nowhere. She's perceived largely, even by almost everyone within the Republican Party, except a very small group, as kind of backstabber. Now she has stood up in a uh, in a meaningful way, but like it's almost like she seemed to have a personal vendetta rather than that she was just going, I'm holding my nose and doing this. I don't want to do this as someone of my party, but this isn't right. This shouldn't stand. And so she has a different image. And she's not on any ballots. So, hi, I'd like to know what new security pact between Great Britain and Ukraine means, and will more countries join? Okay, I only know enough to be dangerous about this, and you all can put more information in the comments about it. So, um, the Prime Minister of Great Britain was over there yesterday, talking to. Um, uh, Zelensky and saying, "Hey, there's this 2 point something pound billion pound agreement. Here's this money. It's like 3.1 billion US. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's sizable, right? And it's going to help tide over here until we can get our act straight. And there's I think it's a 10-year direct 10-year treaty between Ukraine and uh, the United Kingdom. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting that they're approaching it that way. So I don't know what more will come of it, if anybody else will create another bilateral treaty like that, but it's 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 a real show of support. Look, the British have been Ukraine's greatest friend. Like Boris was the first one on the ground in Kiev showing support. And I remember looking at that going like, come on, Biden, where are you? Like, what's going on? And in our place in the United States, we have really taken second place to the UK as far as support for Ukraine, and we shouldn't have. When a story as this has been written, the story will be we've been too slow to support Ukraine, who valiantly fought against Russia for their own freedom, and the West couldn't seem to get their act together to decide that they were going to supply them with enough things because they were deterred by Russia. Nuclear saber rattling. Okay, Sunak said, "At last, until Ukraine wins." Yes, instead of the as long as it takes. Yeah, right. This is the first bilateral agreement promised by all G7 nations last November. Now, I believe other G7 members are working on their own bilateral. The UK just got there first, and like I said, yeah, the UK got there first. Do you think one of Putin's doubles could stand in front of the Hague? Well, I don't know about the doubles. I know that there's lots of people talking about it, but I don't know definitively that um, that's the issue, or that that is legit. Although I suspect it could very well be. I just don't know. So I'm hesitant to say something that I can't prove. First bilateral agreement, okay, we talked about that, but the run to have either Republican or Democratic endorsement, I'm just a Dust Bowl refugee. I don't know what that's talking about. It's supposed to last until NATO membership, which sounds sensible. Yeah, and that is a good idea, I think, for the UK to have done that. I read Boris gave 2,000 in-laws, yeah, to Ukraine, while US grudgingly sent 90 in the early days. They love Boris. Yeah, there's a reason why they love Boris, because he fully supported them. Look, the US understanding was that things were going to fall pretty quickly. Hey, do you want to ride out? And that's when Zelensky decided to stand. I need ammunition, not a ride. And that's when things galvanized. By the way, while I'm on that, Gonzalo Lira, somebody was saying, "Oh yeah, the professor's going to have to do a video about that." I don't want to do a whole video about that. So here's my take about Gonzalo, and I think I saw him. It could be somebody else, but in the early days of the war, I remember like they're like handing out weapons to like all comers, right? They're like, "Hey, come get your rifle," right? And this was like in Kiev. They were doing that. I remember reading articles about this. I remember watching some video somewhere where somebody that in my mind's eye, as I try to remember, and I try to look back in my YouTube history, and I couldn't find it. But in my mind's eye, I remember somebody who looked like him saying, "See, they're giving out weapons left and right. These are just going to go into the hands of mafia. It's just going to go into rival gangs who are going to, do criminal activities." That may not have been him, but I remember somebody saying that, and I thought it was him. At any rate, Gonzalo Lira. Tucker Carlson's gonna make a huge talking point out of this guy. Excuse me. Um, then there's gonna be a lot of propaganda mileage about him because, yes, he was a dual American citizen, American and I don't remember something South American or something, um, Peru or I don't remember. At any rate, so he did have dual American citizenship. He went to Ukraine and was talking about the government, and like treasonously based on Ukrainian law, working against the government and trying to in his propaganda efforts, pro-Russian kind of propaganda efforts. And people are like, "Well, where's the freedom of speech?" there is not really freedom of speech. You are in martial law. And under martial law, even in the US under martial law, like if you were working for the Nazis or like think about the Japanese internment camps, like that wouldn't have stood during World War II, right? Like that would not have been okay to be continuing to work actively with them, or like we'd have maybe a more of a standard unless you look Japanese, in which case everybody got kind of pulled up in that dragnet, which was unfortunate. But like you got to understand, he went to like so. eh, I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking what's interesting about Gonzalo is that we think, "Hey, how did that happen to this one guy in Ukraine?" Now, other people could have gotten into this as well, but he's the only guy that comes to my mind. Whereas nobody in their right mind would have gone to Russia and did the same thing in Ukraine about pro-Ukraine. Like if Gonzalo Lira had gone to Russia and protested, rapidly gone around talking about how pro-Ukraine, 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 the war is evil, stop the military. He would have been in jail in no time. Nobody would have batted an eye about that. He would have been like, well, shouldn't have done that. Right. So people have gone to jail in Ukraine just for holding up a blank sign that in a protest. I'm sorry, not in Ukraine, in Russia, holding up a blank sign in a protest. We know that they're cracking down in Russia. We know that hundreds have gone to jail for speaking about not calling it a special military operation, but calling it a war, or bringing disgrace or dishonor on discredit on the Russian military for not supporting the party line. But the only thing we can point to in Ukraine is this guy, and maybe there have been a couple other people that have, but we don't know who they are. So Ukraine's in a whole different orbit. It's not even in the same it's not the same even ball field. It's a totally different sport than what's going on in Russia. But he's the poster child. If you are pro-Russian and you want to point to something, they now have somebody to point to. Was he tortured to death? So I was reading this morning where what happened was he had pneumonia, which became double pneumonia, and edema or something. I don't remember what the other thing was, and they didn't treat it fast enough or well enough, and he succumbed to that. That's different than being tortured to death. Like they should have been faster with medical aid, and they recognized that he had pneumonia in December, and that's when that's so. Okay, at any rate, okay, but the guy so I see things about how he's a rapist or this or that or whatever. That's immaterial. He shouldn't have been um, going to a place under martial law and then violating their law in this time. But it's not the same as whatever was going on in Russia, which is magnified many, many times. The freedom that they have lost in Russia, it's really stunning. Okay. At any rate, let's go to the next question. Yes, that was him walking. Oh, yeah, there you go. Yes, that was him walking around downtown Kyiv, mocking the idea that they were under attack, conveniently ignoring the fact that it's a big city and the fighting was well north of the city center. Yeah, so great. Thank you, JP Don Quixote, I guess. I remember seeing that and I was like, wow, that's uh, came back to me. So thank you for validating that. Chilean, that's what he was. Okay. Not Peruvian. Okay. Let's see. Next, Russian is freezing is the biggest irony of the war so far. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's something to that. Lira was filming military stuff during the missile attacks, not about his pro-Kremlin views. Yeah, so you can't be doing that, and you got to understand, you get picked up for doing the kind of things he was doing. And again, thank you, JP Quixote, for validating that was him that walking around in downtown Kiev mocking that idea um, in the early days. Okay. John Hoover says pneumonia can be tricky to treat due to antibiotic resistance and can develop into pulmonary edema, which is what he had. He had edema, fluid in the lungs, and yeah. But that's different than as you hear it in other places. He was being tortured for months on end. That I didn't see that, but Perhaps that was the case, but I didn't see that, and that doesn't sound right. Um, okay. Do you think that sanctions are working in Russia, and are they strong enough in your opinion? No, I did an entire video on sanctions don't work, and what I mean by that is sanctions alone don't work, and the American administration seem to think that, well, we've sanctioned and sanctioned and sanctioned. Well, huh. Well, that's still not enough. You got to supply them the arms to stand up, because when there's an appeal to arms, there's just an appeal to arms. You can't like assume that that's going to be enough, and we seem to assume that that's enough, and no, sanctions are not strong enough, and we keep coming out with this a new package of sanctions, like the Russians should be trembling. Sanctions are a tool. It's one tool. It's only one tool. It's not enough. Steal from supermarkets and call it a special survival technique. Okay, let me go back a little. Okay, so at any rate, I started talking about American politics, and then I talked about Gonzalo Lira, and that's the end of my talk about Gonzalo Lira. I don't need to do another video about him. Um, and okay, so back to American politics. So I talked about the four candidates, and these three are together on Ukraine, and Haley's out here. So Haley's going to get my vote, and there's not a lot more to that. Well, hopefully, so because DeSantis placed himself over here, he was seen as Trump's alternative. Vivek is really just little Trump trying to be Trump. And so DeSantis, I think, will lose some of the protest vote, which is where I and other Reagan conservatives like me are going to be with Haley. So hopefully that'll help Haley. What's going to happen is a week from now, you'll see the New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, the Iowa caucuses. It's going to be like -10 degrees when the Iowa caucuses are taking place. So only the hardcore are going to come out. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to trust the Iowa caucuses compared to other things. Now, goes from Iowa to New Hampshire. That's this first in the nation. Second in the nation is the New Hampshire primaries, and then South Carolina primaries. Hopefully, Nikki will have a good show in her own state, although there's a lot of Trump supporters in South Carolina. And remember, Biden didn't get any traction in Iowa or New Hampshire, and it wasn't until South Carolina, when he got Clyburn's support, that it really turned around for Biden. Biden was losing in the first couple primaries. So just suspend your judgment for a little bit and see what's going to happen. But yeah, I'm going to be voting for Haley. People have asked me, well, and I get this like almost every other day. Gerdes, I want to hear that you're not going to vote for Trump, because you're talking all this stuff and you're not going to vote for Trump when it really comes down to it. Like, are you really Republican? Or yeah, I'm really Republican, but it won't matter for me where how I vote in the general election. Either you're not paying attention or you're not an American, because in the general election, in many cases, what state you are is decided by the primary. I mean, decided by the population there, right? So I'm going to vote for Haley in the primary, but then in the general election, I live in such a conservative state that there is no possibility that Biden will get his votes from my state, his electors from my state. So it doesn't really matter after that. So I get to have my say in the primary. That's where the action is for me. That's just the way the American system works. Okay. Or Trump just goes to jail. Oh gosh, I hope not. So I hope not, because you will throw our faith in our system into such a catastrophe if you do something like that. I want Trump to be beaten electorally. I do not want him. I don't want it to look like to half the population like a banana republic, that we're just persecuting our enemies and sending them to jail. So that's just a terrible scenario. You just need to beat him electorally. I know that many people have some great angst toward Trump. I think he was bad for our party, as far as just like he's like the image of the Republican Party is just in the toilet now. And he's taken us into this weird isolationist kind of place that, I'm a free marketeer. I wanted NAFTA, not USMCA. I want us to be able to trade with the rest of the world, not make a deal with this or that. And Trump has taken us different directions. On some things, policy-wise, he actually achieved certain policy goals that I agree with because I am a conservative. But his personality and the way that his combativeness have not been healthy for us as a society. Okay, do you know how Trump's health? I don't think he looks well. There's a long way to election day. That's true for both candidates. About health and long way to election day. I know nothing about either of them, so that's not something that I would pay attention to. Okay, what about the 14th Amendment? What about it? He's not been charged or proven to be. So this is the insurrectionist thing. He's not been proven. Like if he was impeached in January in the second impeachment and removed from office by the Senate, 14th Amendment would apply. If there was a way to prove that that was the case. But if you don't, and you just have arbitrary forces somewhere suggesting he's an insurrectionist, and you can remove him from the ballot, we're a banana republic. So the laws in Colorado, the election thing in Colorado, and I think Maine that just happened, they won't stand. They will not stand up to Supreme Court scrutiny, and it's not because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. It's just that's nuts. And now remember, I did my doctoral dissertation on the U.S. Constitution, so I know what I'm talking about here. That's crazy. As much as you want to remove Trump, don't do it that way, right? You look at let's put it like this: you don't want your teenager to keep back talking every night. The solution is not cut off the kid's head, and that's what the cure here. What they're trying to do is worse than the disease. So don't do that. Um, you don't think the public should be the judge. The public absolutely should be the judge. That's how elections work. And you get what you get from the public being the judge. And uh, so usually there's a backlash to something from, like, if you do get Trump, you get an alternative to Trump on the other side. And so the public has to be the judge. That's how elections in a constitutional democratic republic work. Okay. People used to burn witches. Yes. You know why they used to burn witches? Because they thought that they could actually kill them. So it was like defensive. It wasn't just because they thought like witches are unreligious. It wasn't that. They thought they had real power. In Colorado, there was a trial. Yes, but it wasn't actually on the merits of what was going on with Trump at January 6th. It was some judge proclaiming this, that he could be that, and that's not the same thing. And the Supreme Court will overturn it. I hope the Supreme Court overturns it 9-0 to show strength in the system. I know that's not popular with a lot of you, but I'm not trying to defend Trump. I'm trying to defend the system so that we're not a banana republic. Okay, did you see Sunak meeting Zelensky and the UK's latest aid package? Yeah, we just talked about that a little bit ago. The Senate didn't convict based on his allegations being subject to the legal process. Hitler had his brown shirts, Putin had his FSB, Trump has his MAGAites. I think that's a little unfair. Um, yeah, I think and if you are to say that, I think you need to say, to be fair, that the left has its woke rioters, um, and if you are willing to add that, I think that's a fair process. But if not, that's really just not fair. And try to be fair to all sides. Th- If you if you start with a policy of giving the best face on what's going on, you will find that you're clearer thinking than if you're just trying to prove your own side, generally speaking. And I do that for myself as well. I try to be as fair as possible. Um, won't the RICO laws apply to January 6th, as one half of those already taken place in the plea are doing time and Trump's associated with all of them? Yes, but you have to prove that Trump actually was a conspirator rather than just overblown rhetoric. His whole life is overblown rhetoric, and that's the same thing. So there, yeah, Okay. Anyway, let's move away from Trump onto something more productive than that. Um, okay. The fact that you could watch him cast down the elections he was presiding over. Yeah. Okay. So last thing about Trump, the fact that you could watch him cast down on the elections that he was presiding over for a year and then attempt to make good on his promise to refuse to let whatever gross. Okay. Yeah. He was stupid going on. I won these elections. Like, okay, come on, let's move on from here. And I've watched, he hasn't been making that argument nearly as much as in those early days now, because it's not a winning argument. And yeah, okay, let's move on from him. Okay, what else do you want to talk about? Now, when I get into American politics, I get into American politics because it's how it impacts Ukraine, not because I just want to talk about American politics. Here's another place, and the last place I want to talk about American politics. So Mike Johnson has lost a couple of members of the Republican caucus in the House, so he's down to a margin of two, like 2 members, 3 members. I don't remember how many have left. McCarthy's already left, and somebody else what's his name from New York that was kicked out, and I thought there was one more. At any rate, so he has a margin of two, and people are like, "Well, he's in more danger than he ever was before because his margin's so thin. He could be removed at any time." No, there's nobody in the Republican Party. He's actually stronger. Okay, now I know that sounds weird. Nobody in the Republican Party is going to call for a vote to potentially do to him what they did to McCarthy before, because if it goes wrong, the Democrats could be in charge of the House, and they know that. They're not stupid. So I'm just telling you, sometimes things look almost backwards in politics. It's really weird how things work. When I say backwards, here's what I mean. Like, you don't I got this out of I can't remember the book, but it was a Democrat from Massachusetts, Barney Frank, who said, like, you don't get any credit in politics for solving a problem before it becomes a problem. You only get a credit in politics for solving it after it's clearly become a problem. Which is, it's backwards, but yeah, that's the way it works. And when you understand how things work, it's just a different picture, and you can be like, okay, well, so all that to say, those kind of things you have to see. And like, so the next question is Ukraine aid. Will it come? Yes, it'll come, but they have to work out their political process with each other, arguing for, do we value the border wall, or do we value amnesty for illegal immigrants coming in more than we value Ukraine on the right or on the left? But they'll work it out. They'll hash it out. The extra wrinkle that they have is they waited so long. Now they're going to get into the funding debate of the renewed budget. Like, they had a time before they just kicked the can down the road, and they're going to have to work that out. But they'll work it out. This is the compromise and give and take of politics, and how much they get, I don't know. They will get stuff. They will support. But again, you have to also couple that with the American um, military. Their eye is more on China than anything else right now, and that's going to be the other wild card involved in this. Okay, so that's enough for American politics. Let's get back to Ukraine to the degree that we can. Can the Democrats offer a speakership to a rebel Republican plus one? They could, but it wouldn't go well for him to cross his party. It's like the Lynn Cheney effect. Like, Lynn Cheney took this principled stand, but she also looked like she really just didn't like the guy, and she didn't. And so for that reason, she looks like kind of a jerk to her own party. Um, yeah, so that kind of thing doesn't tend to work out. Okay, I asked my question like 8 times. I'm sorry, Radek. I'm not trying to avoid you. I really am not. I asked my question like 8 times today already, and not once answer. And I tried like 3 live. I'm sorry. I promise you, I'm not trying to avoid you. This cannot be coincidental. Is it my Polish name, or is it me? Or me left? No. Okay, Redek. I'm going to try to find your Redek. I'm going to look up here and see if I can find the last time you asked your question. Redek, where are you? I don't see Redek. Um, okay, I don't see you in here. Redek, Redek. Okay, look, I'm telling you what, Radek Suski, please put your question right here again. Just pop it in. I will answer you. I promise. Whatever the question is, um, I promise I'm not trying to avoid it. I was trying to explain things and then I didn't see it. So you as soon as you pop up, you please put the at Professor Gerdes explains again. It's at Dr. underscore Gerdes. Um Radek, no, you're saying sorry then, but just tell me what the question is. I'm not avoiding you. And I didn't know that Suski was Polish. I I had no idea. Wasn't paying any attention to that. Just please put your question in there, and I will be happy to answer it. In the meantime, do I really believe that Ukraine aid bill will be voted on? Yes, I honestly believe it'll be voted on, and I believe that they'll get something. I'm not sure what that they'll get, but I believe that they will get something. They'll work something out, but they have to get their look. Republicans have to get a win, and the Democrats have to get a win. That's the reality of it, and nobody can. There is a documentary I watched on Mandela. Okay, here Radek is popping up. I'll pop that. Radek, what's the question? You're just um what is going on here? I don't know. That's your question. So until he pops that thing in, I'm going to keep talking about whatever. So I was watching this documentary about Mandela, and de Klerk, who was the president before Mandela, said, "Look, the way it works is nobody can go away victor and nobody can go away vanquished. You have to get something, and I have to get something." And I was like, "Yes, that's exactly right. That's what has to happen in politics." And if one side is stiff arming the other completely, where you can't get anything that you want, and we get everything we want, the system just doesn't work. And so, especially the thinner the majority or minority, especially that's the case. Okay, Professor Gerdes, we're laughing often about pathetic Vantix propaganda, but aren't you concerned that it's targeting domestic audience and they don't have the possibility to validate? Okay, yeah, yeah. So, and that's exactly I am concerned. I'm very concerned about that, and I'm not just doing that to laugh at it. I'm doing that to poke holes in it because especially thank you for raising that question. I'm so sorry I missed that question because that's great. If you have any more follow-up, I'm happy to answer that too. So, like I was talking, I'm looking at my own videos the other day about Russia believes that they're the good guys, and this is critical to understanding what's going on. And and then there were other videos like the 500,000 uh Russia saying that 500,000. I said nope, Ukraine has lost 500,000 troops, and I explained why that was so badly done just logically. But then at the very end of it I was saying, and the misery is that Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter and others redacted, and those kind of guys are going to use that, and they're going to say, well, see, 500,000 have already been killed, and how many more have to die? Because they're going to take that where that's not what 500,000 actually meant. So it is important that we answer the question from Russian media as well as domestic repeaters. That's what I call Doug McGregor and Ritter and others, so that that truth can be dealt with rather than just dismissed. Okay, I hope that was the end of your question. I'm looking on here. Mr. Squiggle comes next, and then Mate Millis, and okay. So I'm going to answer whatever other questions just came in here. So again, I'm going to the bottom, and if you put something in there and you really want me to answer it, just cut and paste. There's no prohibition against asking again and again and again. Just pop that in. I'm trying to answer everything I can. Thank you, and my apologies. Yeah, no, it's not a problem. I'm sorry that I skipped you that many times and that you kept asking. I'm not trying to. If you really want to make sure that something's clear to me, put the at Dr. underscore Gerdes in there, and I will try to. I mean, it'll flag me rather than just saying like you're cross talking to other people. So Ronnie Vacan said, "Is the coalition with Greg Terry, Rick the Ukrainian, getting bigger?" Yeah. So when Greg and I started talking about this, like, okay, Greg was already doing what he was doing. Greg's a great guy, and frankly, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the impact that he's had, that he's able to be there. I'm not. I feel bad. Like I'm only been able to contribute this much. He's raised $250,000 before me and given it out and been there. And so he was doing this, and I thought, I'm not a fundraiser. This is not my skill set. This is not my strengths. If were like, hey, are personally donating whatever, that's different than like asking you to raise for this, because I don't want the money to pass through me. I don't want to touch that. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I want to research and try to communicate. That is where I can sing my high notes. And so I do that. But by linking with Greg, now I could have done this with others. Like I put out there in my community some time ago with Rick the Ukrainian. I asked if in the community, hey, does anybody know if this guy is legit? Starsky answered, yes, he's one of ours. Good enough for me. Guys, if you want to go give to that. From the very first video, I put Samaritan's Purse. Like that's been in every video that I've done on Ukraine, maybe unless it came from my phone and didn't have the material, but like from every video on my laptop, that was there. But I didn't want it to come through me. So I connected with Greg, and then we said, hey, who else can we rope into this? Well, he just been on Johnny. I have a good relationship with Johnny. Johnny and I were talking before the video for Christmas went up. I called up Johnny. We video chatted for a while. I said, hey, look, you know him. He's a good guy. I'm doing this. You want to jump in? And said, well, in theory, yeah. Let me find out more about it. And then Johnny jumped in, and then Rick had a connection, and then we tried to. And so we are trying to grow this. We're trying to, whoever can support what he's doing, and you're going to see some wild, like Greg had just look at it. Yeah, yeah. You can see the last message was from Greg. He just contacted me. You're going to see some wild stuff coming down the pike with Greg, and he's doing some great work, and it's worth supporting. So, yes, to answer your question, it will be growing. It has been growing. It will be growing. Okay. Um, the viewers are asking if you would vote Trump so they know where you stand. You keep sidestepping the question by saying you live in a Republican safe state. I will vote for Haley in the primary. I will likely vote for her again in the general, whether or not she is on the ballot as the candidate for the party. Does that help? Does that answer the question? It doesn't matter what happens in the general election. But I will probably vote for Haley twice, come what may. That is what I plan to do at this point. I might vote for my wife instead in the primary in the general, depending on what happens. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I'm not sidestepping. I'm just telling you how it actually works. Okay. Dr. Gerdes, do you know Scott Ritter recently went to Chechnya? Yeah, I saw that video. Wasn't that terrible? And yeah, Scott Ritter and Doug McGregor seem to really root for Russia over the United States, and that's a really interesting thing. Like they really seem to have a very dim view of their own country, but they're American citizens. They have the freedom to go and be stupid if they want to be stupid. So to put this to rest, will I vote for Trump if he is a nominee? No. No. Do you understand? I can't. But he could have a radical conversion between now and then and be like, you know what? I see the light. I'm now pro-Ukraine. It would still be hard, but at least there would be something. But no, he's not. He what he plans, the course that he plans to take us, I don't think is healthy at all for Ukraine, and that's what we're all about here. Okay. uh Professor Gerdes explains, do you think that there's going to be another Democrat candidate like the California governor? I don't see it at this point. Cheryl says, went to the beginning on 1.7 speed. Cheney was a backstabber. Yeah, question mark. Yes, she's perceived that way by much of her party, is what I was trying to explain, because of the way that she went and did that while she was taking a principled stance. She is not somebody who is seen at all favorably by most of the Republican Party. We see her as someone who we disagree with, who is standing up for the rule. Well, of course you do, because you're on the other side of the spectrum. And if there was a liberal who is, taking this same principle stand against Biden's this or that, Republicans would probably see her favorably as well. I'm just telling you, within the Republican Party, she's not seen very favorably, except by a very small fraction who is in the never Trumper kind of crowd. Even I am questionable about what her motives were here, because seemed to take so much pleasure in that stance. Um, how do I say this? She seemed to be. She seemed like it was more as much vindictive as it was principled. If that makes any sense. So even I'm like a little skeptical, but she wouldn't have any traction in the Republican Party. So that's where that is. Okay. Radek, you're back. I'm going to answer whatever you say for the rest of this thing. So I just to cover over my whatever. As a lefty, I believe Nikki would be probably better than Joe and first woman president, a Republican. Laugh out loud. Well, that's interesting. She's not really waved that around, because that's not a thing that conservatives tend to wave around. Elect the first woman, whatever. I remember joking when Obama, I was on my school board in Virginia, and I was the only conservative on the school board. We had a lot of 9-to-1 votes, and or 8-to-1 votes. It was 9 on the board. And I remember joking with the school board chair about, are you ready, excited about this election? Yeah. You ready for the first historic? And I said, and she was like getting excited thinking about Obama and, first black president and a female vice president. And her face just, it was pretty funny. But conservatives don't tend to make big hay out of something like that. Just, this is not our default, like, thinking. We don't tend to think in terms of those kind of categories first and foremost. That's just where we are. But yeah, she would be the first female president. But if she's not the first female president who supports the female first policies as perceived by the left, she's not going to be as well received. So that it's not really, it's not helping her, it's not hurting her. It's, yeah. Okay. At any rate, okay, enough American politics. What else do you want to talk about Ukraine? Let's go. We'll be done within 10 minutes. So, any other questions about Ukraine that I can answer? How much foreign influence can be expected in American events leading up to our election? Oh, I would imagine the Russians are still going to try to do the kinds of foreign interference that they did before. And look, I mean, I know that some people are convinced that Trump was a Manchurian candidate, that Russia put him in place. That's not my read. And it's not because I'm a conservative. It's because in reading about this and not having a liberal or left-leaning bias that said, yeah, the Russians put him in place. Just suspend that for a moment. What if, and I think that this is more accurate, what if the Russians were actually just trying to destabilize the US and thought that Hillary was going to win? Now, they didn't like Hillary either, right? They didn't know what they were getting with Trump, but they knew that they didn't like Hillary. And what if they were just messing with us to make it really hard for whoever was elected to govern, thinking that it was Hillary? As I understand it, Putin was actually surprised that Trump won. Okay, so now I could be wrong, but what if that was what was happening? And I think that that's the way that they have been doing things all along. Like they're just as happy to gin up woke activism as they are to gin up like Charlottesville, right? Because it causes controversy and us fighting within ourselves, and then we are not of a united position in looking at stuff like what's going on with Russia invading Ukraine as a bad thing. I think that that's a more powerful, clearer explanation of what happened. But Again, I could be wrong. This is what I have researched and understand it, but it's not necessarily gospel truth, and I'll tell you that. But that is my understanding of this. Okay. Um, what do you think about Charlie Mitchell stepping down from the presidency? If no one else is found, Orban will be next to lead that. I would be surprised that Orban would be next to lead. I'm sure somebody will step into that void. Okay. Dr. Gerdes, can you explain why Alex Jones is so pro-Russia? Um, so I think a lot of this comes to what you consume. So he's been consuming these Russian talking points and this perspective for a long time. And I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding. And this is where I was going, and this is the last thing that we'll talk about, let's say, um, unless anybody has something just really, really pressing. Um, so I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding between what we hold as traditional values in the United States and conservative values and that kind of thing. And he's not really conservative. He's really more over in that populist land. And he's also yeah, he's rarely seen a conspiracy theory that he doesn't like. And so he's an odd cat. Like he lost a lawsuit about claiming that the Newtown conspiracy or Newtown shooting was a conspiracy or hoax or whatever. I mean, like that's kind of evil. Like your kids are killed by a gunman, and then he's denying it and saying it's fake and conspiracy and all this other like that's a whole different level of evil. He lost a civil suit about that. Uh, Sued to like $1 billion or something like that. Um, but there's a real misunderstanding, and you don't have to believe me. Some of you will disagree with what I have to say here. Um, Between how someone like me views traditional values, like biblical, historic, traditional values, and what Russia views as traditional values, or what Orban views as traditional values. When Russia's talking about these values, they mean something that they're using the same words but meaning something different. It's almost like when you talk about racism, and if somebody's talking about racism and they mean old school racism, where it's like the older version where I have to think badly of you just because you're black, I'm white, and so now I'm going to discriminate against you. Well, that's racism, as opposed to the modern concept of systemic racism. But we keep using the same word to mean two very different things, and then we're not communicating. I think that's a good analog to what's happening here with traditional values and traditional values. They're not the same, but they a lot of people seem to think that that is, and particularly I'm starting to believe that if you could help evangelicals as a block understand that this is something very different and very toxically, almost cult-like, about what they differently than what they actually believe, you can dislodge them from their support for Russia. I think that's there's something here. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm pressing into that issue, trying to understand and trying to see if movement is possible. And then the next question is, how do you communicate that? And maybe too little, too late before I can get that sorted out in my own mind. But that's what I'm working on. Okay. At any rate, so Alex Jones is he's just weird. He's out there. Okay. Next. Uh, I thought Suski was Japanese. I didn't know what it was. Russia preaches Euro-Asianism. That's right. Timothy Snyder's book has been really helpful in helping me understand that. And somebody bought me that book as a Kindle ebook and sent it to me and started reading it. I was like, oh, I got a piece of the puzzle that I didn't have before. And that was really helpful. So very grateful. Yeah, it's not Christianity at all. That's El Kudo said. And it's like they took on the garb of Christianity to make Russia this is the nation that is Christian and everybody else is terrible. I go back to the video, Russia believes that they're the good guys. I did 3 days ago. I unpacked that completely. That's exactly it. And if you see that, then you go, there is something like your average. Uh, uh, evangelical Christian sitting in the pew Sunday morning does not see the world like Solioff is talking about here. Like Putin is claiming what Ilya, I guess his name is, the philosopher, is preaching this Christian fundamentalism. And again, to the left, it all looks the same. Even to those on the right in the Trump MAGA group, it looks more like the same than people like me from the old school conservative crowd. We see there's levels of differentiation that you can see, and that came out in my survey on my community tab. So I'm trying to unpack that a little bit more, but I think there's something here. Okay. As suggested by you, Savage Sage explains that mentality well. Yeah, I'm so glad I found him. And we went from oh, Savage Sage. He went from like 1.3 thousand. Let me look this guy up again now, because you guys, I'm glad you guys adopted him and are able to see SAVAGE Sage. He now has, where is he? 5,000 subscribers. I don't think he even recognizes what happened yet, but you guys, yeah, he did some good work, and he needs, his voice needs to be elevated. um okay, so good news about Taiwan elections. Did you see election that went well? Let's take hope that in that one, yeah, but it's also one where if he's not careful could also, I think that one was more escalatory toward military conflict. If it went the other way, it'd be more escalatory toward absorbing Taiwan. Either way was going to be a trick. It's like pick your poison. Um, Scott Wagner, any chance at all getting these live chats later in the day, 5 a.m. Saturdays are up? I understand, but I have to coordinate my own life with family and other things, and so that's tricky. That's why I do what I know it's an unpopular time, and I'm not trying to. I'm not. I'm never going to be the Mercado media streamer. Right? I'm never going to be like big like that. Um, Guy was on World War II, not the greatest patriotic war. It was World War II, not the great patriotic war. Twisting history again means they didn't learn from mistakes. Yeah, and they keep twisting history to make that, and they're twisting theology to make it fit what they want it to fit. Ronnie Vraken says, good news about the Taiwan elections. We already talked about that. Summer to cannabis. It's funny to hear the point of view of an agnostic Christian or believer. An agnostic, I'm not agnostic Christian. Are you talking about me? I, I'm like a stereotype. I'm a walking stereotype. I'm fully Christian. I'm fully conservative. The difference here is that you're hearing someone like me try to talk about this reasonably, not just, here's my. I I I don't support Biden in any means. The only thing except Ukraine, like that's about the only place where Biden and I agree. Um, but I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt about why he did this or why he did that or why somebody's. I mean, but I'm not agnostic. In fact, anybody who wants to talk about Jesus Christ and faith in Him and that kind of thing, I'm more than happy to talk. Email me. Let's talk. So that's where I stand. But I fully support Ukraine, and this is where Johnny Pierce and I got together early on. Was like, hey, you wrote books about debunking Christianity, and I'm like the guy you were writing about. So you want to talk about how we people that are so opposite can support Ukraine? That's the first video that we actually did together was as a collaboration. Like, hey, we're on polar opposite sides, but we can all support Ukraine because this is important. And so, yeah, if I ever gave anybody the impression that I'm agnostic, I'm not. I'm fully conservative. I'm not moderate conservative, but I'm not nuts. There's a difference between just drinking Kool-Aid and actually thinking through what's going on. I'm like, I call myself a Reagan conservative. I'm what a conservative was before whatever Trump did to the party. And I've just stayed there. Okay, if Trump is a criminal, shouldn't he receive discriminatory justice before public arrest? Okay, so if he's a criminal, should he go to jail? Yes, if he's a criminal and you can prove that. But the trick is that there's in politics, perception is a lot of this. And okay, so if he was, they should have prosecuted him shortly thereafter, not going into the election season. let's say that's the first thing. And two, the perception that you would be persecuting your political enemy by trying to criminally charge him is what's at play here. Okay, so if he is, he should go to jail. Yes, I'm not trying to step that, but do you really think that other candidates for or other candidates from other parties haven't had this thing? And this, it feels like a double standard because others haven't been charged along the way for whatever. That's another layer of this. And so if he is, yes, I'm not fighting that. I am saying that I want him to be beaten electorally so that you can move on. And just again, I support Haley, and I want to get to a scenario where when we get to election day, you can vote for the candidate of your choice that supports Ukraine, and I can vote for the candidate of my choice that supports Ukraine. And then we can move on. Foreign policy is not a place where we should be having this kind of political fight. My brother turns out to be as liberal as I am conservative. How about that, right? And so we have a lot of interesting political conversations, as you can imagine. And he said something when it came to COVID that I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. He said, one of the mistakes that we made was that we politicized COVID. Now, I don't know if you remember, but with COVID, if so when COVID first hit, when Trump was in power and he had this Operation Warp Speed and the drugs that was moving through rapidly and that kind of thing, and he, conservatives were like, "Yeah, that's right. Get crush that through the FDA, make that go through." And then when Trump was out of power and Biden's in power, oh, by the way, and the left at that time was like, "I'm never taking that drug. I'm never going to be doing anything like that." And then Biden comes into power, and you see the left like almost virtue signaling by like, "I've got my card, I've got my shot, I've got my 2 shots, I've got my booster." And conservatives were now going, "I'm never taking that vaccine. You don't know what's going on with those vaccines." I'm like, what happened? Whoever's in power should not dictate whether a vaccine is legitimate or not, right? When Trump was in power, it shouldn't. When Biden's in power, it shouldn't. And like, we're thinking politically, like through a political filter about whether something actually is. That's crazy. I mean, that's simply nuts. So my brother rightly pointed out we never should have politicized COVID, and that's right. We should have gotten together like political powers that be instead of doing what political powers do. So we gotten together and said, "Look, on this we will have a united front," and we didn't do it. And I think this is the same kind of thing with Ukraine. On this is too important. We should have a united front. I think the same thing if not Russia, if China invades Taiwan and that kind of thing. I think that's too big of a thing. We should have a united front. At any rate, yeah, it's so on some things they're just too they're above politics. If that makes sense. Okay, last couple of things. The Big Cat said something about Manafort's. What about Manafort's communication during the Trump campaign with Russia oligarchs, where the oligarchs insinuated that Manafort owed them favors to pay the $10 million? I don't know anything about that, but I do know that Manafort was knee deep with Russia and Ukraine, and like he was with Poroshenko. Not Yanukovych working on there. And so it's all bad news with those back connections to Trump. Now Manafort was now sent out to the sheep pen. He was like kicked out over time, but it started down the wrong track. Okay, Ronnie Vranken asked Putin how he handled COVID. I don't know a lot about that. That's actually something that I don't have a lot of context about, but it's interesting to find out, I would imagine. American foreign policy should be kept 1,000 feet away from American policy. That's right. That's right. Our foreign policy should not be a political football, and it can't help but be to some degree. But like what we've done is weirdly taken sides depending. And now here's the really strange thing. Let's assume now this is just a thought experiment. Let's assume that it's not Trump and Haley wins. Let's just say, all right, I'm sure many of you hope that that would never happen, but let's assume, and she's full-throatedly supporting Ukraine. Does the left after that back off of Ukraine. Because now I don't mean the Ukrainian American types that are already, supporting one way or another. I mean the left in general move away from support for Ukraine because Haley comes to power, let's say. Wouldn't that be strange? And that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of very strange phenomenon that I've observed here. And I think that that's unfortunate. We should not be acting in that way. Okay, last couple of minutes, we'll wrap up. I thought you supported Ukraine, and now you say that you support the GOP, which is holding up the. Are you kidding me, Phil? How long have you been watching me? I have almost 1,200 videos supporting Ukraine. Are you kidding? So I am a conservative, and I support Ukraine. I'm not saying my GOP right or wrong. I'm saying my GOP is wrong in not supporting Ukraine. Um, Okay, and to those of you who are going to say, "Well, why don't you just become a Democrat?" You all wouldn't want me for many other reasons, so don't worry about that. Um, Last little question. Reagan was weak. No, he was not. He stood up to the Soviets, called it the evil empire, and he was the first one to really take that kind of position. I like Haley. She is mean, but I don't question her commitment to American interests. Okay. Last couple comments. Went out short. Okay. Well, I guess there's nothing else really significantly there. Okay. I hope that helps give you some context. I'm giving you my perspective. You can take my perspective and ignore it, or you can build it into the way that you think. Maybe it modifies what you think, or maybe it doesn't do anything at all. But that's still my perspective. And I'll be back later today, tomorrow, with more full-throated support for Ukraine, and I hope you will be too. All right. Thank you for your time, guys. I'll see you later.